Thank you very much, Diego, and welcome everybody for today's presentation. My name is Dan Tiernan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Campbell. I'm one of the 5 owners of the company. We're going to be talking about is your waterfront high-rise safe, and some key questions to ask and things to know. I've got some great experts in here today to help us get through this. And with me today is Evan Swaysland, and then I also have Michael Bianchini and Alessandra Bianchini from Carousel. So why don't I let them both introduce themselves quickly. Evan, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. Hi, my name is Evan Swaysland. I'm an engineer here in the state of Florida. We're a local firm that does basically restoration to existing buildings. And I'm a former past president, multi-year president of the International Concrete Repair Institute for South Florida. That's basically my background. We've been in business since 1990 doing this sort of work, basically since when this type of work started down here. So we're very familiar with high rises, low rises, and the conditions that your buildings face.
Great. Thank you very much, Evan. And then Alessandra and Michael.
Yeah, I'm Mike Bianchini, president of Carousel Development and Restoration. We've been in business this is our 42nd year. We employ approximately 188, 200 men. And the bulk of our business is Broward and Palm Beach County. This is our attorney and my daughter, Alessandra.
I'm Alessandra. I've been admitted to the Florida and New York bars since 2011, and I'm a state certified general contractor and one of the primary qualifiers of Carousel, along with my father, Michael. And as Evan mentioned, I also sit on the board of the Southeast Florida ICRI chapter as the treasurer. I believe this is my 6th year as the treasurer on the board.
And she has 2 kids. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'm going to go over a brief review of the agenda here, but before we get started, I just have to mention the collapse at Champlain Towers is an absolutely horrible tragedy. There were over 150 people reported missing, and the number of deaths continues to rise as the search and rescue operations continue. And it's hard to imagine what these families are going through, and our thoughts and prayers go out to all those families impacted by this. With that being said, the agenda we're going to go through today it's going to be very fact-based. We're going to just tell you a little bit about Champlain Towers, just the building structure and so on, and just make sure everyone understands the scope of the collapse. And then we're not going to make conjectures about what happened or didn't happen, but what we are going to do is talk about possible causes for a building to potentially collapse, because we don't understand all the details of what happened there. No one does, and it's going to take a long time to figure all that out. Then we'll talk a little bit about 40-year inspections that I think a lot of you are learning more about across the state. We'll talk about some other structural disasters in condos in Florida. Just how rare is this, and what can we look back at the past and learn from. Then we'll do a general discussion about something that Evan and Mike and Allie know a lot more about than I'll ever know, which is concrete deterioration and restoration. So we'll go through some basics on that, talk about projects in that arena, and then funding options, and then 5 real action items of things you can do right now based on if you've got some concerns about the safety of your building. We had several hundred people signed up for this course. I think there's and we had a lot of great questions that people asked, and we're going to answer, and these are just a sampling of some of the questions that we're going to try to address as we go through this. So just be patient. You saw what the agenda is. We'll get to all these different topics, and we'll try to address all of these questions and a lot more as we move through it. But I also want to make a quick disclaimer that there'll be certain things that we won't be able to answer. So our goal today is general education. like I mentioned, we have people from over 500 condos that registered for this course. So we can't address questions that are specific to your building or your area, although we will talk about certain areas based on the content of what we're reviewing. So this will also be very fact-based. We won't be predicting if or when something may or may not happen in the future. I'd love to be able to be good at that, but we're not even going to try. And there are a lot of theories floating around about a lot of topics related to building safety. So we're not going to try to debunk any mysteries here. We're going to focus on just the facts, because I think there is so much that you can learn just in general about construction that maybe you didn't care about before, but maybe you want to learn a little bit more about now. And although we have an attorney on the call today, Allie, thank you, Allie, we're not focusing on the legal implications or legal responsibility of what may or may not happen if an accident. So I know there were some questions about that, but we've got so much to cover already. We're going to try to avoid that. There's a lot of other webinars about that. So with that, just Champlain Towers, I've got some of the basics here. Evan, why don't you kind of comment on some of the attributes of this building that might be relevant to other people from a structural standpoint?
Yeah, so this building is a typical building construction. You have parking located underneath the structure, and then basically the first floor level is the recreation deck, and we're not exactly sure how the building was constructed. I haven't seen structural plans, but from industry chatter, we believe the building was primarily reinforced with post-tension cable system. So that's a pretty, for 1981, that would have been, early on in that type of technology for condominiums down here. Currently, that's the most used form of reinforcing for high-rise buildings. So it's not like it's an uncommon type of reinforcement. And then the other thing we don't know is if the pool deck slab was separated from the building slab via an expansion joint. So those are kind of the things that are sticking out to us as potential for what happened and why. But that's the basic construction.
Okay. Just one other picture I wanted to show here, just of kind of from a top-down view. The most obvious thing I see right away is the proximity to the ocean, but anything else there, Evan, that is relevant?
No, I mean, this is the north end of Miami Beach, and in that area of Florida, there's basically condominiums all up and down on that barrier island. So this is, atypical for what happened.
Right. Okay. So many of you may have seen this short video before, and some of you maybe have not seen it. It's very disturbing. And I just wanted to warn you that I was going to show this video clip from the surveillance camera from a neighboring property. And I'm doing this just so that I can have Evan comment on kind of what he's seeing happening. And again, we're not going to make any conjectures or theories from this, but just kind of observing what we're happening and what he's seeing from a structural engineering standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and start it now. Second.
So, and it's hard to watch, and from the first-hand accounts, a portion of the garage collapsed approximately 10 minutes or so before call it the north center section of the building. And in the aerial images you can see now, the portion of the pool deck, the pool deck slab collapsed into the garage. The portion that you can see on the ground more or less aligns with that center core that collapsed first. So now what caused the collapse, I don't know. There's going to be right now, I know there's the NIST experts in addition to all the other forensic experts from the American Concrete Institute, Post-Tensioning Institute, all these other organizations. There's going to be a lot of analysis done on the structure over the next 6 months to a year before they can know more or less for sure what happened. But you see the pool deck collapse may have caused some instability in that center core. That type of pancaking of the slabs is usually indicative of something lower giving way, like a column most likely giving way, causing a pancaking effect. And then once that center section goes, then the east section no longer has its lateral support, and then it comes down as well. Likely the reason the rest of the building stayed up is that the elevator cores are basically in the center of the remaining thing that's still standing, and that probably stabilized that enough to not come down as well.
Okay. Thank you for that analysis. So now from that, I wanted to just for you to comment on not specifically what happened here, but what are some contributing factors that possibly could cause a collapse? And we'll just kind of go through these and you can comment on what they mean. So design flaws.
So that would be, the engineer who designed the building maybe didn't account for, punching shear or something like that. We'll talk about another, a building in the 1980s that collapsed as a construction site, and that kind of relates to that. But so, it is rare, there is redundancy in codes, but, there could be design errors in the building. But the rarity of a collapse like this, and that's kind of what we need to reiterate is how rare it is. And but the design flaws would be on the beginning end prior to construction. Something wasn't accounted for that should have been.
Yeah. And what about construction flaws?
Same thing, currently now, you need to have any new construction over a certain size, you need to have a threshold inspector making sure that everything is done, according to the design plans and specifications. So, but there are instances of rebar being set too high or cables not being placed at the right depth and things of that nature that could contribute to potential damage.
I mean, I've even heard people talk about maybe back in the 70s or earlier that possibly that people were using, the wrong kind of water or the inappropriate sand. I don't know if these are myths or.
Those are mostly myths. I know the big one is always, well, they mixed it with the seawater. They just pulled it off the beach and they used the beach sand. That's not true. There's definitely older buildings, built in the 50s and 60s. You do see a different type of aggregate than what you saw in the 70s and 80s. They were using something a little bit different than what we're using now, which all comes from basically the western ends of the counties, all that lime rock. But that's a myth. If you mixed it with seawater, you would have had, corrosion showing up within year 1 of your structure, not year 30.
Right. Next one, the deterioration of the structure.
Yeah, as soon as your building is built, it starts deteriorating, and our environment down here is a harsh environment for reinforced concrete. We have basically all the things needed for that embedded steel to corrode. We have high temperatures, we have high humidity, we are adjacent to chlorides in the ocean, and we have a lot of rain. So all 3 of those things contribute to deterioration of your exposed surfaces.
Right. And then talk to us a little bit about foundation erosion.
Yeah, and this is really what a big unknown is. I know, early on the FIU professor came out and said that the building was sinking and need to get more information on that from the experts when the reports come out. Most buildings are of that size, and I don't know the foundation, but would be built on piles and have a pile cap, and that all goes to your columns. So this is a very, very rare thing to happen for high-rise buildings, would be foundation erosion. That piling placement, that's all monitored by testing labs, and they make sure they get the bearing capacity correct, because that's really the most important thing for a structure.
And then sinkhole or underground erosion.
Yeah, again, I mean, this is, kind of what I talked about before. That's really an unknown. It's very rare to get a sinkhole on this side of the state. We have different geology than, say, the Tampa area and the middle belt of Florida. That's on some of the karst geography karst geology, where you get, some sinkholes opening up from underground caverns. You go up there and you get to go in these beautiful springs, and those springs contribute to the sinkholes. So we don't really have that down here. So that's why this is such an odd, occurrence.
Now, I know you and I mentioned, or I'm talking about, will you expect geologists to be required to assess potential underground erosion or other issues with the surfaces?
Correct. And that's going to be, something that a lot of buildings are looking at right now, is to get geotechnical engineers involved to confirm their foundations. And again, this is, all new, as of last Thursday, this type of effort to make sure everything is safe.
Other thing I put here, excess load on the roof.
Yeah, roofs are, designed for, a live load of, 20 to 40 pounds, depending on the year. I know they were doing a roofing project at that building, but just from watching the videos, it certainly appears that it didn't start at the roof, that it started somewhere down near the ground level.
Yeah. When you say 20 to 40 pounds, does that mean 20 to 40 pounds per square foot?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Sorry. I want to scare anybody.
All right. Nearby construction, could that possibly create issues with other buildings?
Possibly, yes. Typically, no. When they when they do the pilings, they have monitoring on all neighboring buildings to ensure that they're not doing something bad. There had been issues in some other areas of the United States where they were doing these deep foundations and building giant, basements, and then they would undermine the foundation of a building next door. So this is commonplace and something that, is accounted for in new construction. But again, we're not going to know anything until the experts provide their reports.
Right. And then the last one here, Michael, this is something that we talked about last night. You mentioned neglect.
Neglect is a forerunner. And we've all seen it as engineers and as contractors. They give us a contract, but then they don't want to do the work, or they usually, once a building is told they have problems and they get a survey report from an engineer, many times they take 2-3 years to get it on board, to get the work done, because there's so much infighting in the board and in the residents that they don't take their Florida residents as seriously as many of them do to their up north residents. They treat it almost like a motel. And to get the board and the residents to understand, you've got to maintain your building. And even down to yearly plans of preventive maintenance. Even if you're not doing the big jobs, certain things can be done with screws going into the tracks to sliding glass doors. Make sure they're stainless steel. Make sure they're sealed with urethane and then put the screw in. There's a lot of things that can be done on a preventive maintenance program. But neglect is, to me, the biggest question.
Yeah, I think that's a, yeah, I think that's a,
You know, I know the engineers, they're extremely professional. And you might have a design flaw, but and even the building department, everybody's going to be pointing fingers, but the main problem is neglect of the building, in my opinion.
makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And I think we all agreed when we've been talking about this the last couple of days that it's really not just one thing. It's a whole culmination of things that you know, would have to happen for something like this to occur. It's likely not going to be one thing. It's a whole series. So with that, one of the key things out there that people understand is, you know, been designed to be a potential preventive measure for this are these 40-year inspections. Evan, do you want to kind of mention a little bit about that?
So the 40-year inspection is a requirement in Dade and Broward County. So when your building hits 40 years old, you're supposed to hire an engineer and architect to review the structural and electrical systems. And then every 10 years after that, you need to do another recertification. And I think, you know, this likely will become a thing in Palm Beach and maybe elsewhere. Realistically, what you're supposed to be looking for is life safety issues. And that's really the basics of the 40 years, life safety issues. And it started due to some balcony collapsing due to corroded rebar right at its cantilever moment. And that's kind of what stemmed this was, you know, hey, let's make sure these buildings are safe for continued occupancy. And its really intent was a real cursory, a visual inspection of the building. You're not diving into, you know, cores of slabs and X-ray and GPR to determine, you know, all these different conditions. It's a visual inspection and correcting life safety issues. And incidentally enough, we had a pretty productive conversation with the city of Fort Lauderdale assistant building official, because we do those inspections and we've been doing a lot of work in Fort Lauderdale for a very long time, and talking about the 40-year, talking about balcony restoration projects, and there's definitely going to be some changes to that certification program moving forward.
Basically, Evan, I have the question, when you do a 40-year inspection, it'll involve railings, code, fire alarm, electrical. They don't get in, and concrete, visual concrete above ground. They don't get into anything underground or geotechnical, correct?
Correct. I mean, there's a standard form, and basically what you're looking at is for, you know, you're looking at the reinforced concrete structure, any, you know, structural steel elements. You're looking at walls, you're looking for settling or bulging of walls, which would indicate maybe you have a problem with the footing. But no, I mean, there's never been inspections of deep foundations, and that's going to be something that is likely going to be new. And you know, there's not a lot of companies that can do that non-destructive type of testing to make sure that your footings are working how they're supposed to work. So again, this is all, you know, new territory as of last Thursday.
I have some questions from some audience members. I think we can piggyback onto each other while we're on this 40-year inspection topic. Some people are interested in what is the normal useful life of a building and how often should you get inspections, and also can a visual inspection give a high degree of confidence to the safety? So, you know, I mean, can you kind of answer some of those? What's the normal useful life?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a caveat, you know. it's kind of equated to a classic car. If you bought a 1950 Corvette and you never did anything to it, it's going to be rusted out and not working after 10, 15 years. But if you meticulously maintained it, it could last 80, 90, 100 years. There's buildings in Miami Beach that are 80 plus years old that are still functioning as they were originally built. So that's kind of a loaded question as to what my intended useful life is.
Probably safe to say, don't wait 40 years to do an
Right.
inspection.
So, and we'll get into it more in the concrete deterioration component of this and go through what that kind of looks like. But, you know, if you wait till your building's 40 years old down here before you have anybody look at it, you're already 20 years too late. You know, that's realistically, that corrosion process is starting right around the 20-year mark. And that's when you should have already have had done a couple of painting and waterproofing projects by the time you hit that 20-year mark. And then when you hit the 20-year mark, now you're going to need to start doing concrete restoration in conjunction with your painting and waterproofing projects.
And I think that's a great point. One of the key things we try to remind all of our clients that are high rises, really all the associations, is just the absolute importance of preventive maintenance. And so often it's so easy to ignore when you have a new condo. You know, it's been turned over from the developer. Everything is, you know, working great, and it's hard sometimes to get people to focus on the importance of making sure that we develop these maintenance contracts to make sure that everything stays in great shape and that we don't just kind of let it go and count on warranties. And, you know, hopefully this will just kind of remind people of that.
And I'm going to go, I see the Q&A, and I'll, when I'm not talking, I'm going to start going through and typing some answers for some of your guys' questions. So just bear with me.
All right. Yeah. So then I put up a quick slide here and you mentioned some of this just from a 40-year inspection. These are kind of the minimum inspection guidelines. So it gives you a sense of the kind of things they're looking at, and Evan already hit on these. And then from an electrical standpoint, there's also a fair number of things you're looking at here, but like he mentioned, it's not necessarily a code enforcement thing. This is more of a life safety situation, and they're looking at these from the standpoint of that. So there's not like elevator inspections. There's not, you know, related to this. There's not piping and, you know, paving and other things like that. It's very much around, you know, the structural and electrical from a life safety perspective. So, and then, so the next thing that we were going to talk about is honestly the kind of the rarity of anything even similar to this. There's been nothing that's ever happened like this that I'm aware of, or anyone I've talked to has been aware of in Florida or even anywhere in the country. And so we just did a little research on other condo structural disasters, and a couple that we're going to talk about here are this condo in Cocoa Beach that collapsed under construction in 1981. Which is, you know, 40 years ago. And then this one building in Sarasota called Dolphin Tower that 11 years ago was evacuated, almost 11 years ago to this day. So let's talk a little bit about each of those. Evan, why don't you tell us what you know about Harbor Bay Condo in Cocoa?
Yeah.
This was the year I graduated high school, by the way.
Yeah, and
so,
I wasn't even born yet. So, but I actually have some cursory knowledge. You know, we're not a large office. We're an office of 4 professional engineers, and 2 of them work for a company that did some expert work at the time for this building. So basically, the reason for that collapse was a combination of design flaw by the engineers, and then also construction flaw by the contractor. There was a particular problem with where the rebar was set, the effective depth of the rebar in the slab, and then there wasn't enough accounting for punching shear in the slab. So what ended up happening is you had basically a punching shear failure, which caused that pancaking effect. And And then there's also some discussion of compressive strength of the concrete not being per design, which all kind of relates back to multiple errors resulted in this disaster.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And then I think one interesting thing did come out of that. Tell us about what this threshold building inspection is.
Yeah, so, you know, when you're performing work on certain size buildings, so it's a 3-story or higher building, and it also, if it's I think a building over 5,000 square feet too, it's a certain size building. The building departments or Florida building code requires the owner to hire what's called a special/threshold inspector. And that's a specific license for basically inspecting ongoing construction work, because the building departments won't perform the inspections. They just review your inspection reports. And the Florida Board of Professional Engineers just came out with another special inspector license called a special threshold limited license, which allows, you know, engineers to perform inspections on concrete restoration projects with minimal repair. So those are the 2 licenses now that, you know, you're basically need as a building. You guys are all going to meet this requirement that are likely on this call or this webinar. So you need to make sure that whoever's inspecting your building has this license and is using the correct authorized representatives that the Florida Building Code allows you to use.
Great, thank you for that. So again, it never happened before in the history of collapse like this in Florida that we're aware of. Again, and this was under construction where it emerged very quickly while it was being constructed. It was still a horrible tragedy. A lot of people died, horrible situation. But again, we're not aware of anything even remotely similar to what we've seen happen here recently. What about this Dolphin Tower in Sarasota? What do we know about that?
What we know is that some residents on the 4th floor basically started noticing a very large crack opening up in their floor slab. And they actually had an engineer that had been doing work out there, which is Karen's Engineering, who's still out of Sarasota. I think they have a remote office here.
So, Evan, just to be clear, so I think the 4th floor was actually like the first residential floor, right? It was
right,
3 stories of garage and
right.
Yeah. Okay.
And they started noticing a crack. He ran over there, and within a few days, they basically shored up the entire structure and likely saved it. And I didn't see a significant amount of anything as to why the cause, what happened, you know, the why. But they did spend, you know, over $8 million in repairs over many years to repair the structure, and it is now, you know, back inhabited again. But there was no injury or death there because they acted quickly when they saw a crack forming that was fairly wide and you know, we're talking inches wide, not just a hairline crack.
Right. So again, there were some really obvious signs of something wrong that just couldn't be ignored. So I think the point of this was just to kind of show, look, that we're absolutely uncharted territories here. This is nothing we really have a lot of case studies to look at. We can learn a little bit and just understand a few things from some of these past problems. But, you know, again, it's an incredibly unprecedented event that happened that I think it's going to take a long time to really understand. The next thing we want to go into here is to talk about, you know, the buildings down here, right, are fundamentally, the structures are primarily concrete and rebar. And, you know, one of the key things, the challenges we have in all of our condos is the deterioration of this concrete and the restoration. So we want to just talk a little bit about, make sure people understand why this happens, how it happens, and then, you know, what you have to do to deal with it. So about you want to just explain kind of this process here of concrete corrosion?
Yeah, so when your concrete slabs and columns, they have what's called reinforcing bar located inside of that, and that's typical construction. And I'll get into post tension a little bit further, but that when the concrete encases that reinforcing bar, it has a high pH level, and then over time that pH level basically starts to drop due to chloride ingress into the slab. And then once the pH level reaches a certain point, your chloride content is high enough that embedded reinforcing bar will start to corrode. So it's rust forming on the reinforcing bar. That rust's expansive force is stronger than the bonding force of the concrete, and you'll typically start to see cracks or spalls. Spall is the definition of a spall is simply a smaller piece breaking away from a larger piece. In our world, a spall is when the concrete physically breaks away from the bar. Either now you have either exposed rebar, or you'll see cracking, and then it'll have a hollow sound. So that's what a spall is. And if you get enough of this deterioration, your structure, the strength and integrity of the structure is now compromised. Typically, our buildings are built with exposed balconies, exposed pool decks, exposed garages. So where your building is exposed is where you're going to see this, because you need high temperatures, you need high humidity, you need exposure to the environment, and that's where we see it. And typically that corrosion will stop 1 to 2 feet into a unit, on a balcony slab, because my interior of my unit, is nice and dry, and you're pulling out the humidity with your AC, and you're keeping it at a proper temperature. So, you're typically only seeing this type of deterioration at exposed areas. And I'll have one caveat to that, is that, if you have a pool equipment room or a swimming pool, the chemicals for the pools will rapidly accelerate this process in those areas. Post-tension systems are a little bit different. That's the steel cable that's typically, in our area, it's an unbonded system. So it's a steel cable encapsulated in grease in a plastic sheathing. So you're usually not getting corrosion of the cable in the middle of its run, but where you do see corrosion is at the ends of what's holding the cable in place. And the cables are stressed to, approximately 30,000 pounds. So, if those ends give away, then you have a major problem there. That's why it's when you're have a post-tension building, it's important to check the edges of the slabs that are exposed. So that's kind of a little background on that.
Many people ask why the design of post-tension. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's not the use of post-tension to allow a building to have less columns?
Yeah, so basically with post-tension, so a regular rebar is typically has a tensile strength of 60,000 pounds, right? That's its bending force. So a post-tension cable has a tensile strength of 270,000 pounds. So you're able to make your slabs thinner and your columns wider, so you have cheaper construction basically for the developer. So that's kind of that thought process. Plus it provides more open plan for condominiums.
Evan, some people wanted to know if there was an alternative, something else other than steel rebar post-tension cables aside, some sort of plastic.
No, I mean that's what's used. There is more use of something called carbon fiber reinforced polymer bars, and then also glass fiber reinforced polymer bars, but it's not used in residential construction. You may see it in bridges, that are exposed to de-icing salts regularly, but it's really not a technology that's used in residential construction. We have used stainless steel rebar in repairs, particularly in pool equipment rooms, just because of the exposure, but it's rare for buildings to be built with anything other than conventional carbon steel reinforcing bar.
Okay, great. And then what about, what should people be looking for if they're concerned about their concrete deterioration?
Yeah, so from a unit owner perspective, it's cracking in your edges, your overheads, cracks in your tile. You'll sometimes see rust staining, particularly around railing post pockets. Any type of spalling is of concern. If you have water intrusion coming through a slab or into your building, this could all be something that you guys need to pay attention to.
Yeah, so you ran by a term real quickly there that I think a lot of people, railing post pocket, right? That sounds, so just explain what that is.
Yeah,
that might be something people...
Your aluminum handrail, typically the slab will have a core, so an open hole for the aluminum railing to sit in, and that gets filled with the non-shrink, non-metallic grout. What can sometimes happen is that the aluminum post is too close to a rebar and you get a different metal interaction there, and you can actually accelerate some of the corrosion of the steel in your railing post. So it's usually what you'll see is rust bleeding coming out of the railing, right around the post of the railing. So that's an important thing to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's great. I was talking to somebody else the other day and I was like, wait a minute, I'll make sure I understand this. Just the simple idea of just having a post on your balcony connecting into the base, and the fact that you're having to open that surface and you've got a connection point, and there's room for water to get in, potentially a lot of things can go wrong. Right. So even little things like that can cause problems.
That's where preventive maintenance would come in, to crown it a little bit higher so the water rolls away, and caulk around each post to make it waterproof. That's part of the preventive maintenance program that buildings should be instituting.
Yeah, actually, you were mentioning yesterday, Michael, we were talking about, the people that want to have this decorative tile out on their balconies. And why don't we just mention what's the risk in that?
I don't know one engineer in all of South Florida that wants to see tile. Carpet, they're doing away with, but there's still buildings that allow tile to be put on. Engineers can't do a visual. You can't sound it. Your tile might be hollow, might be a poor set. When you sound it with a golf club and it sounds hollow, if the tile's not there and the concrete's hollow, you have a problem. But once the tile's there, you can't see, and the tile, if it's not set right, may be the cause of the hollow sound. So you get a false reading there. But engineers have been pushing for years to not allow tile on the exterior balconies.
Yeah. So then, all of this really is about, managing risks, things that could go wrong. So Evan, you want to just kind of describe these three things here?
Yeah. So, I mean, this would be our, what our typical failures of structures would be, a spall on a slab edge breaks loose and falls to the ground and hopefully never hits anybody. That would be the typical, worst case scenario. And, occasionally you might have significant amount of corroded bar at the cantilever moment. You might have, excess deflection or maybe some separation of a slab, but you never had the pancaking, and one thing that is very serious, particularly if your garage is under your building, is paying attention to your building columns, your building beams, and your garage columns to make sure that, those are all, don't have any deterioration and are, if they do, to repair them properly, to make sure that you're maintaining load path and things like that for garages, columns, and beams. It's not just, there needs to be thought about, how you're making the repairs. It's not just chipping out and putting stuff back, when that process might cause a more significant problem elsewhere. If you remove the load from the column and put it elsewhere, you could have something bad happen in a different portion of the building. So it's a lot to consider, and it's not for a lay person to consider. It's for you guys to hire an engineer to come out and do an analysis and make recommendations, and then follow through with the recommendations.
And that, this next slide here is really, it made a lot of sense to me. It sounds like, that they're all these situations are a little bit different. There's not one way to repair this, and it all depends on what the situation is.
Correct. And that's part of hiring somebody that's experienced in doing this. And I will tell you, in our industry, which is exterior repair, and I think Carousel can corroborate, now I can't even talk, corroborate, is that, our industry was already stressed with the amount of work that we had. And it's even more stressed now with what's going to happen over the next six months to 2 years in terms of repairing buildings. So you need to make sure that you're dealing with somebody reputable. The International Concrete Repair Institute is a great place to start. There's a lot of people very active in our local chapter, and we've all been in the industry for a very long time and know the good and the bad. And I think that's a good resource if anybody wants to get some information about, why we're doing repairs a certain way, and maybe who to talk to and what are the materials, and to gain some knowledge in this.
We'll make sure to share some of that information on the outbound on the message. So I'll make sure Diego follows up with you to get that. Say that one more time. It was the
International Concrete Repair Institute. They work with the American Concrete Institute in preparing, guidelines for how to properly repair concrete.
Awesome. Michael, you had something?
One of the things a lot of building managers should be cognizant of is to have their board not let repairs be done in-house. A lot of buildings like to try and do the repairs in-house. They run to Home Depot, they get a bag of stucco mix or concrete mix, totally different products. They don't have the corrosion inhibitors, they don't have the strength, they don't have, and it's nowhere near a correct repair. And a lot of building managers, I'm sure, come up against boards that are saying, let our maintenance guy fix it. He can smear cement. They think it's just a question of an easy throw cement at it.
Right. Yeah. It's not cosmetic. This is, yeah, it's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. And then I also just, we talked about some of the potential red flags to look for. Evan, you want to just comment on some of these?
Yeah. So, the main thing is identifying cracks and corrosion. And if you see it at your unit, report it to the manager so that they can have maintenance take a look, and then there can be a trail, so that way it gets followed through. Leaks in garages. If your garage is underneath a recreation deck or pool deck, and you're getting leaks into the garage, that water is likely affecting the reinforcing in the slab. But a lot of that might not be serious, depends on how your building is constructed. So if you have a pre-stressed joist system in your garage, and you have leaking coming through your slab really doesn't have any reinforcing in it, so it's not as critical per se, if you have like a flat plate slab. So there's different thoughts in this.
Yeah, so, but putting in a gutter to remove the water may not be the best solution.
No, that is never we used to call them the Miami expansion joint system, was putting a gutter underneath the joint and just directing it to the ground.
That's stopping the leak after the water already got in.
Right. you're not supposed to have water travel through concrete slabs. So it is imperative to have correct membranes on slabs. And the reality of this is that this does not come at a cheap price. You know, these doing things the right way costs money. And just going a little bit more through Dan's list. I think over the next 20 years, I think we're going to be facing another thing that we're going to have to start thinking about, which is sea level rise. I know at our house in the Keys, the water used to never go above the dock, and now it goes above the dock 3-4 times a month. So I don't care what anybody's opinion is on global warming or not. I just know the water level is coming up, and you might see it now in your subterranean basements or garages, and you need to develop a plan to try to mitigate that through, you know, vapor barriers, waterproofing barriers in garages, effective pumping systems. And then if we can't do any of that, then maybe we need to start thinking about putting protective cathodic protection jackets on columns and things down in garages that are experiencing this condition, similar to what, you know, you may be doing at, you know, large bridge supports, you know, that run through the ocean. So that there is technology to address this, and it might be something that, you know, we need to start looking at further. The excessive spalling, if you have any spalling, it's already excessive, and you need to start getting an analysis done and coming up with a repair plan. And then lifted tiles, that is always the biggest thing when we enter into a balcony repair project, is that the $500 in tile installation you spent in 1992 is the most priceless possession you have in your entire life, and I can't remove it in order to properly fix the concrete. And those times need to change, and we need to be able to repair absolutely everything at this time so that we can be assured that we're doing everything the right way. And you know, lifted tiles, delaminated tiles, it's not going to be saved anymore or deferred. That's going to start coming off.
Right. Thank you for that. And then, so if it turns out that you do have issues, and everyone, like we've said all along, you're going to have this happen in the life cycle of your condominium. If you've got concrete, you're going to have to be dealing with restoration projects. Carousel graciously shared these 8 steps to a successful restoration project. And I think the synopsis is just making sure you know what you're doing, you get the right partners involved, and you leave it to the professionals and make sure they can do their job. You know, we could spend 2 hours on, this is like a 2-hour continuing education course, but I'm just going to leave the bullet points up here for a minute and let you know that we'll send this out as well, just as a reminder that, you know, there's a lot to think of in this. Any other comments you have on this, Allie or Michael?
No, our saying is follow the engineer. Always, a lot of buildings, again, we'll try in-house. Hire professional engineer that's familiar with South Florida corrosion, structural, and
I see a lot of questions from people asking, you know, if I see a rust spot, what do I do? Or if the building's leaking, what do we do? You know, and I think, you know, the takeaway from having a successful project is to start off with a good engineer. So if you're unsure, like Evan was saying, if you see spalls or if you see any of these issues, your first person to contact would be a structural engineer. If you have a relationship with a contractor, you can call them. Likely they'll come out, and if it's expansive work, they'll probably say the same thing. You need to contact a structural engineer. Make sure you have good board members who can make a decision, move quickly, property managers who know what they're doing. You know, restoration projects are long and tedious, and they're noisy, and nobody wants to go through them. But I think what we've seen the last week is that they're absolutely necessary.
one of the toughest things, pill to swallow for a board and the residents, is it's a moving target. It's not like new construction where you could say, we're going to build this for $3.4 million and it gets done. With restoration, you can get a guesstimate from the engineer's survey, but until you open up that crack and see. If you see a crack that's 4 feet, you know you have at least 4 feet of repair. It's likely to go 6 more inches on each end. You're going to find things when you uncover tile, and even when you pressure clean, you will find more damage on building that was hidden. And because our work is all done on unit prices, we only get paid for what we do. But nobody knows the answer to how much has to be done. So it's very hard pill for a lot of buildings to swallow. They say, well, you can't give a contractor a blank check. That's why it's important they hire the engineer. The engineer works for the building and he coordinates everything. We're under his auspices.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that this is one of the key reasons we've been hired by so many previously self-managed condos over the last 5 years. I'll tell you, probably 1 out of 3 of them hired us because their boards made bad decisions that their manager couldn't stop them from making. And they had a project run sideways, and they recognized that, you know, hiring a professional management company, you've got someone that has got a lot vested in making sure this can happen. You know, we've got responsibility too. So
we've all heard the famous term, we don't do it that way up north.
Yeah. So then on to, you know, this is a pretty obvious question, but if you run into a situation where you've got to deal with one of these projects, there's only a few ways you can handle it. I mean, one of those is if you've got reserves, you know, you can tap into your reserves. Maybe if you've got pooled, it's a little easier. If you don't have pooled reserves, it might be a bit of a challenge. Everyone hates special assessments, but when it's a life safety issue, you know, there's no amount of money that you can't put on it that won't make sense. And then it's absolutely never been a better time to get loans for construction and repair in South Florida. There's a lot of banks that are the ones that we work with specifically that are, you know, focused on association lending, and they're very comfortable doing it and happy to do it. So there's a lot of ways to handle this, and you know, and when it comes to life safety, you've got to, it's nice to know you have some options. And then the kind of the last key point here is, well, you know, what are we supposed to do? You know, what are some things we can do? And we kind of agreed there are really like 5 things that you can do now that make a lot of sense if you're in a waterfront condo or really any condo. And that is, the first thing is you really should have a regular building engineer that you have a relationship with that understands your building. I know that the ones that, you know, Evan and Campbell work with, you know, he's been there for a very long time, great understanding of the building. So it would be a great idea if you wanted to have some more peace of mind to try to get a thorough inspection and try to identify potential risks. And like he mentioned, if you don't have that relationship, you need to get it. And the best place to get it is through the professionals you work with, the management company you work with maybe, or your attorneys, or some of these institutes that he's mentioning, or some of your neighbors even. But ideally, it would be from this next group here, which is, you know, it makes sense to re-examine some of your past restoration projects. I know a lot of the condos we're working with have been writing up, kind of explaining to the owner base, look, here's the concrete work we've done over the past few years. Here's what we've done in the garage. Here's what we've done, and all the inspections that have happened related to that. And just to make sure that, you know, that there weren't things in the garage that you decided to put off for 5 years because you didn't have enough money, didn't want to do an extra special assessment. The next item is reserve study. So I'll tell you, there's a lot of condos that when I've told them, listen, if you got a reserve study, and they tell me, well, we don't fund our reserves. I said, well, that doesn't matter. You have to have a reserve study. You really do. You have a fiduciary responsibility to understand the condition of the infrastructure of your condominium. And that's what a reserve study does. And you really need to have that. And you have a legal obligation to be able to put a budget in related to that in your budget every year, so that you understand what the expected reserves are. So that's super important and absolutely critical to developing a long-term plan of what you need to be doing on your building. Not just a 1-year budget, not just a 30-year plan, but a 3 to 5 year plan on what you need to be planning for from a restoration, repair, and replacement standpoint. The next item, you know, and I think Michael's point about neglect, you know, this is the key. The key to neglect is having a great preventive maintenance plan. And this is one that is detailed. It includes all the internal activities, all the external activities from outside vendors, and you're holding people accountable and keeping track of it. It's an incredibly important thing to do, and something that I think it's easy to, it's one of those very important non-urgent things that you have to make sure you don't avoid.
I tell clients, even after we do large concrete restoration job, to bring on the engineer at least 2 or 3 years after that job is finished, and then every other year minimum, just to check and do a quick take on that. And that's after the building's been restored. Keep an eye on it.
Yep. And then the last point is just reminding everybody, and I think everyone gets this now, safety is the #1 consideration in all the projects. That's got to be your priority when you're trying to figure out what to do next, where to spend the money, whether or not you can afford to hire an engineer. How can you afford not to hire an engineer if there's a potential risk in the building? So I think any additional points you guys want to add on that, Evan or Mike, on these 5 things to do?
No, that's what you need to do.
I think we're all going to be busy. So listen, after you leave this webinar, you may realize there's a lot more that you want to learn about, a lot of different things. And I just wanted to let you know that we have just the place to go, and that is Florida Association News. It's a blog that Campbell maintains for the last decade. It has thousands of posts, on hundreds of topics. And I've put up the little example here. This is a blog post on 40-year inspections from a few years ago. And if you just go to readfan.org, and you guys will all be subscribed to this based on the fact that you're attending this, and then you put in 40-year certification in the search the blog, you'll find this blog post. And it looks like a pretty brief blog post, but don't lose sight of the fact that what I've done down here is linked to a 4-page article in Florida Community Association Journal that's got a lot more great detail. So again, this is a super resource for you, and hopefully you'll take advantage of it. It's got all kinds of different topics. And like we said at the beginning, we're going to send you all the presentation, link to a video, contact information. We'll have some of the information Evan had. We'll get over to Diego. We'll get that out. And also some information on future classes. So we appreciate all of you coming today. Diego, I think you're going to put a quick poll up, right?
Yeah, so if everyone would just take a quick second to answer this poll, it should be popping up on your screen now. Just a couple questions, and it'll help us improve our future webinars with your feedback. So thank you.
So, and I want to send a great thank you out to Evan, Allie, and Mike. I mean, I think this might be the most chaotic, busiest year of their careers, short of a hurricane. So
yeah, is there a hurricane coming? Because I heard that today, and now I got to.
Yeah, there's a storm. We're in the path.
Oh, we are? Cool.
Yeah, we're good. It's going to be a year.
Yeah, thank you all for investing your time. You guys are volunteers. A lot of you are volunteers, and we appreciate your effort in this. And this is a tragic thing that happened. Hopefully, we can learn some things from it and make sure we do everything we can to protect our condos. So.
Thank you.
Thanks
guys.
again. Thanks everyone. Have a great 4th of July weekend. Thank you for participating. Thank you all for coming here.
Thanks for having us.
You too, guys.